Welcome, everyone, to Daily Life Church. It's good to have you all here. Man, the Tuesday night crowd, everybody still talking? Shh, shh, shh. Hey, right? You want to sit in the front? Just kidding. I can only do that with family members, you know. It just works that way. Can we unshare that? No, we actually leave it there. Like, I'm sorry, we forgot about that. I forgot. We're having that representation here. So, guys, we're going to have the life culture. But Susan Penner's here today with somebody back there. Annabelle. This is about the fourth time I forgot her name. And all the other times I'm not telling how many times, but every time I go by there, no, I don't know her name. I can't say something. But anyway, I'm going to say it. Annabelle. Everybody say Annabelle. That's it. She is in charge of the merchandise back there, guys. You want to go check it out and support this. Amen? Amen. So, you know what? If you are access to Facebook, please share the broadcast. If you have access to YouTube, please share. If you have access to Twitch, share. Or if you're on Twitter, Twitch or Twitter, or X now. So if you're in any of those broadcasts, if you're watching replay, we welcome you here. And I pray that you keep your mind open through the whole time to understand what is being said today. Don't shut yourself off. Open it up. And let's really, I met Susan, not really met her. I just listened to her at lunch and at Smitty's, and I said, we got to have her in the house because I love the way she talks, because I can understand. And if this guy understands, it's a good thing. So it's a good thing. So with no further ado, Susan Penner, come on up. I hope I'm getting your name right.
Yes. I'm fortunate or unfortunate to have a name that everybody can spell, and I don't really need to repeat. So anyways, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so honored to be here to speak to you on a culture of life. I'm the executive director of an organization called Life Culture Canada. I don't know if some of you may have heard of an organization called League for Life. That is it started in the 1970s, and this is actually the same organization. We're just further along in our journey now, and now it goes by Life Culture Canada. And we focus on, I'll just make sure we get this working. George, was the USB key taken out, or is there a reason why the slide is not working? Anyways, we're a pro-life organization, and we focus on a few different things. We focus on life-affirming education. It was working before. Anyways, we focus on life-affirming education, supporting women. Okay. Okay, just give me a heads up when you're done. I'll keep going. So we kind of have 4 pillars. We focus on pro-life education, which is what I'm doing here tonight. We like to inform people and educate people about what's going on in our country, because most people really don't know a lot about abortion and now medical assistance in dying. We support women who are in crisis. So that might look like providing meals, helping with rent. Oh, there we go. Helping with rent. Even helping people find a place to stay. I know Sarah was involved with that. She connected us to a girl who needed a place to stay, a pregnant teenager who needed a place to stay. And fortunately, we were able to kind of figure something out that she could find a family to live with while she was pregnant and have her baby, and that's just been a great support system for this young woman. Generation Life are the young people of Life Culture. So we have a teenager, like she's 19 now, I believe, and her name's Rhea Peters, and she goes to different college campuses and youth groups and speaks about this stuff. It's really good to have a peer for that age group, a peer talking about these things. And then Angel Baby is pregnancy and infant loss support that we provide for women who've had miscarriages, stillborn babies, as well as abortions. In our culture, because life is so dehumanized in the womb, when a woman has a pregnancy that she actually wants and ends up losing the baby, they often don't receive the care that they need, because those who are in positions to help kind of like, well, you know, you can have another one. It's just tissue. Babies have been dehumanized. So it's really important, and it's a really good opportunity for us to provide support for women. So I personally have always been pro-life. I believe it's what the Bible teaches. I got involved in pro-life work after a friend of mine got pregnant when she was in high school. And it was a difficult situation. She was very poorly treated. And for me, there was this real disconnect how as Christians, you know, we say we support life and want women to keep their babies. But when I actually was walking alongside a friend of mine who had a pregnancy, that message didn't really come across. She was treated really poorly. So that was my first kind of interest in pro-life. I ended up volunteering at Grace Haven Pregnancy Crisis Center, which used to be in Steinbach. So I did that for a number of years until that shut down. And then about 5 years ago, a really good friend of mine called me over and she said she had just found out she had just about been aborted. The appointment had been made at Planned Parenthood. It was going to cost $200. Her dad ended up getting a ticket, getting stopped by the RCMP and got a ticket for $200 for driving without a license. And literally there was the money for the abortion. So she was that close to losing her life. And it really impacted me because she's married, her kids are friends with my kids. They're just this amazing couple in our community that I'm sure some of you would know. And I just kept thinking, like, who else is missing? Who else should be here? And so that's just really in that moment, like the moment she told me that, I just really felt the Holy Spirit telling me, you need to get back involved in this. So I started volunteering with this organization, and then 3 years ago, I became executive director. So that's just kind of my story on how I got here. Reducing the value of life to this subjective choice that we see in our culture is just a major ethical problem for me to reconcile. A baby in one woman's womb is treasured and wanted and adored, but put that same baby in another woman's womb, and it's disposable. And I just can't accept that. It's just so inconsistent. And we're seeing this on the other end of life as well, as people are aging and, you know, they're getting sick, don't have the same capacities they used to. Now we're saying, you know what, you're better off dead. You're better if you choose euthanasia, or now we call in Canada medical assistance in dying. So these things really move me. And I just really feel compelled to speak on this and talk to people about this. So this presentation is to educate, equip, and encourage you to speak for life and live with a consistent life ethic from the beginning of life until its natural end. So I'm going to talk both about abortion and medical assistance in dying and the scope of what we're dealing with. And I'm going to start the presentation with abortion, and then after that we'll move to MAID. So in Canada, every year, 100,000 abortions take place. 73 million take place globally, according to the World Health Organization. Those numbers are just mind-boggling. 37% of unplanned pregnancies in Canada end in abortion. And then 61% of unplanned pregnancies globally end in abortion. As well, 20% of all pregnancies in Canada are ended in abortion, and 29% of all pregnancies globally end in abortion. So those numbers are just massive. To give you some perspective, Annabelle, maybe you'll have to go for, if you could, would you be willing to go do this? Oh, here we go. So just to give you some perspective, in Canada, abortion takes 100,000 lives a year. 81,000 people die by cancer in a year, and 53,000 people die by heart disease. So we spend countless millions trying to save the lives of the born, right? Obviously, which is what we should be doing, is helping people who are alive live better and treat them. But at the same time, we are spending countless millions trying to end the lives of the unborn. Further, if you look at this even from a government perspective now, in budget 2021, our government committed an additional $45 million over 3 years to prove abortion access in Canada, and then in 2023, they extended this for another $36 million. In addition, our country gives almost $1 billion a year globally to fund abortion around the world. So these numbers are really staggering, right? It's framed as women's reproductive health, those types of things. But our investment in ending the lives of the unborn is just staggering. Since abortion was legalized in 1969, Over 4 million babies have been aborted in Canada. Approximately 1 in 4 women have had an abortion by the time they are 45. So this just really, I guess, moves me to be compassionate towards women and be very careful how we talk about this topic, because every day we are in contact with women who've had abortions, whether we know it or not. So it's really important that we handle this topic appropriately and with compassion, because a lot of women who've experienced it do struggle. I'm not going to say all women do, but a lot of women do struggle with it. So we just want to be careful how we handle this, because we're walking amongst women who are wounded from this in our day-to-day lives. So abortion is a big deal, whether people want to acknowledge it or not. But this just isn't just happening out there. This is happening in the church as well. 4 in 10 women who've had an abortion attended church in the same month as their abortion. Only 7% of people or women talk to somebody at church about it, and 52% of church-going women who've had an abortion say no one in their church even knows about it, right? So again, it just shows how women are dealing with this privately and quietly. So this is a huge issue for our culture, but it's also an issue for our church. So if there's one thing I've noticed in the past couple of years since Roe v. Wade has been overturned, is that Christians are not equipped to engage our culture on abortion and medical assistance in dying. We are floundering to defend life in what is truly the greatest human rights abuses of our time. And I think we've all assumed, and I think it's really easy to assume, that Christians are quietly pro-life, but that is not the case. The vast majority of Christians have never heard a sanctity of life message in the church, and this silence is leading Christians to form their opinions based on what they're hearing on social media, from celebrities, in the news. So Christians are feeling insecure when pro-choice arguments that sound reasonable to them come up, and they don't know how to respond. So I just really believe it's imperative that we become educated on this and that churches talk about this, because when we're educated and know the information, we don't need to be defensive or combative. We can calmly and reasonably talk to people and try and persuade them to why pro-life is the best way to live. So what I'm going to do now is just talk very briefly about how Canada got to where we are today. So abortion was legalized in Canada in 1969 by the Liberal government led by Pierre Elliott Trudeau, as long as this committee of doctors certified that continuing the pregnancy would endanger the woman's life or health. So it was a small committee, and a woman who wanted an abortion could go to this committee, and they would say yay or nay. In the early 70s, Henry Morgenthaler set up an illegal abortion clinic in Montreal. He was subsequently arrested 3 times because this abortion clinic was just for whoever wanted it, bypassed this committee. So he was subsequently arrested 3 times before the Quebec government just stopped charging him, and he continued to do abortions in Montreal. In 1975, a petition of over 1 million signatures, the largest in Canadian history, was presented to Parliament requesting protection for the life of the unborn. You don't see this in the history books and in the textbooks in school. The largest petition in history is just ignored, and this is pre-technology. There weren't like email, fax machines, that type of thing. This is churches, this is pro-life organizations in communities gathering signatures across the country. And they gathered 1 million. They presented it, and it was just ignored. Maybe I'll get Annabelle just to do the slides. Does that make sense? Yeah, if you can just go do the slides. So then in 1988, the Supreme Court of Canada struck down the existing abortion law as unconstitutional, saying that it interfered with a person's charter right to life, liberty, and security of the person. That's ironic, because if you think about that in the context of a baby, where's their right to life, liberty, and security of the person? This is known as the Morgenthaler decision. But this did not mean the courts endorsed the idea that there should be no federal legislation regulating abortion or protecting the preborn. It wrote that Parliament has the right to make a new abortion law. The Mulroney government made 2 attempts at this. In 1988, a law was presented to allow for early-term abortions, but not late. But it did not pass because of opposition from both abortion advocates and pro-lifers. So abortion advocates didn't want any restrictions on abortion, and pro-life people thought it was way too broad. So then both sides didn't agree with it, so it ended up not passing. Then in 1990, the Conservative government under Brian Mulroney presented a bill to restrict abortion unless a physician found that a pregnancy threatened a woman's physical, mental, or psychological health. The bill actually passed the House of Commons, but it was defeated in the Senate. And today, none of the political parties represented in Parliament officially support drafting new abortion law. So this is really important. We are the minority. I view it often as we're the foreigners in our country when it comes to this. So we, if we're going to just be this really aggressive, like we demand, we need to change this, it's going to fall on deaf ears because the majority, not even close to the majority, is with us. Only 8% of Canadians are pro-life. So as we approach this, we really have to focus on the grassroots level. Again, equipping churches, equipping people, helping women at the grassroots level because, again, there's currently no political will to touch this issue. Just to give you some perspective, though, in European countries, so again, now abortion in Canada is allowed through all 9 months. But in European countries, most countries have 12-week abortion laws. Canada is truly the outlier. So if you look here, the United Kingdom is 24 weeks. But if you look at Greece, Italy, France, Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, et cetera, there's a 12-week limit on abortion. And in Canada, it's all 9 months. So we're just used to this because we live here. But in terms of what's happening in the world, we are certainly an outlier. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about what is an abortion. One of the challenges with abortion in our culture today is that there is a complete lack of education and information. So classes on sensitive issues in school that talk about sexual health, and they talk about abortion as birth control, but they don't teach what happens during an abortion. Courses on feminism preach abortion as a pillar of equality for women, but they don't talk about the humanity of the child in the womb. So again, something we have to understand is our culture genuinely does not know about this. And when they support abortion, they actually think they're doing it for the right reason, to support women's rights, bodily autonomy, those types of things. So we can't treat the other as the enemy because they really only heard one side. And again, this is why it's important we're equipped in this so we can, actually say this is what's going on and this is what's happening. So 52% of Canadians say they're completely pro-choice, and that means full 9 months. 8% say they're completely pro-life, and 41% say they are somewhere in between. So I'm just going to attempt to bring some clarity as to what abortion is and how it impacts women. I won't show pictures or really go into too much detail here, but it's important to have a little bit of an understanding. So an abortion is a procedure that intentionally ends the life of the human embryo or fetus while in the womb. In general, language like termination of a pregnancy, removal of products of conception, or removal of tissue is used. However you frame it, the truth is a life is ended. The majority of abortions are done in the first trimester, so there's different ways of doing this. The abortion pill is very popular right now and is being touted as just this really easy way to abort. Annabelle, can you just go to the next slide? So what's happening is women are at home. They get the pill, abortion pill. It's a 2-pill procedure. And they've been told, it's just going to remove the tissue. It's no big deal. All of a sudden, they deliver a little sack like this with a little baby, either in the toilet or in the bathtub, wherever the procedure is taking place. And they are shocked. And we hear so much post-traumatic stress from the abortion pill because these girls, all of a sudden they see this little baby and they were told it's not a baby, it's just tissue. So this is being framed as just almost this miracle drug, for abortion. You don't even need to go to the hospital now. And yet it is just tremendous trauma that women are experiencing through the abortion pill. Okay, you can go back again. Okay, so yeah, the abortion pill or vacuum aspiration is when the cervix is dilated and a hollow tube is inserted to suction the baby out. The force is so strong, it pulls the baby apart. Then you get to the second trimester. A D&C is similar to vacuum aspiration, but because the pregnancy is further along, a knife is used to cut up the umbilical cord and placenta. And then the D&E is when the cervix is dilated and forceps are used to dismember the baby and pull out the baby piece by piece. In the third trimester, induction is used, and that is when a baby's injected with digoxin or potassium chloride to cause a heart attack in the baby. The mother is then induced and delivers a dead baby. If the baby is born alive, which happens on occasion, it is usually left to die. Just consider this: when vets euthanize animals with these procedures, potassium chloride or digoxin, they give the animal anesthetic because it's considered cruel otherwise, yet a full-term baby in the womb is not even given anesthetic. I would venture to say that if the 52% of Canadians who are completely pro-choice knew what happened to a baby during an abortion, they would be less inclined to support it. It's an incredible act of violence, and it is something, I don't think most people would support if they actually knew about it. Regardless, Canada has no abortion law, meaning there are no limits on these procedures. We are the only democratic country in the world without one. So how does our culture rationalize this? So 96% of biologists agree that life begins at conception. So how can we be okay with this? So the foundation of the, being able to support this is called personhood theory. And that means just because somebody is human by virtue of their species, it does not mean they are a person. To be a person, you have to have a certain level of cognitive capacity, right? So you have to be a certain amount along, a certain level of development before you qualify as a person. The problem is when people start identifying those capacities, they realize newborn infants actually don't have them either. Or what about people with intellectual disabilities or people with dementia? So who gets to decide who has the right level or what's the correct level of cognitive capacity to qualify as a human? It falls apart very quickly. Next, we're going to talk about personal autonomy. So this, you hear it all the time, my body, my choice. So this refers to a person's sense of self-determination, which is something we all agree with for the most part. However, we know that there are limits to what we can and should do, which is why we have laws. We can't just all go do whatever we want and do our own personal autonomy because it impacts other people. So when it comes to personal autonomy and abortion, framing abortion is simply a matter of personal autonomy, ignores legitimate ethical questions, impacts more than the person making the decision, and it reduces overall level of care for everyone. So personal autonomy, what it does, whether it's abortion or medical assistance in dying, it just frames hardship and suffering as a choice. Ultimately, if you are choosing to go through something hard, when you have the option to abort the baby and fix everything, or at the end of life, I'll talk about this later, you are choosing to suffer, that's your choice. That's your choice. And it's reducing the level of care in terms of if a woman goes and has, an ultrasound, and when she's pregnant and they find out that the baby has something, whether it's Down syndrome, whether it's anencephaly, trisomy, whatever it is, they're immediately encouraged to abort at multiple appointments. And they often aren't given information about what kind of care they could receive. The medical system actually doesn't even want to provide that kind of care. So when we're devaluing life this way, it's actually reducing the level of care in the entire system. And not to mention my body, my choice. You're not actually aborting your own body. You're aborting a different body. So that's kind of the ironic thing in this as well. So abortion as mercy is something I want to talk about next. So actually, you know what? Do you want to go back to that slide? I just saw that slide pop up. So again, we talk about abortion as personal autonomy, my body, my choice. Studies show that almost 75% of women face external pressure to choose abortion. So we can frame it as, yeah, it's your choice. It's not like a woman is making this independent decision for the most part. And usually she's facing tremendous pressure from the father of the baby to choose abortion. And 66% of post-abortive women say they knew in their hearts they were making a mistake when they underwent the abortion. These are stats and numbers people want to ignore, but that is the reality of what's happening. Okay, abortion as mercy. So here you see a picture of the Canadian Paralympic team. And is there anything more inspiring than, seeing them overcome these obstacles, and now they're these top athletes in their field? And this overcoming, like, it really inspires the rest of us as well when you hear these stories, you know, of people overcoming. Yet the abortion movement says that if there's a chance a baby would suffer from disability, poverty, or foster care, that is a legitimate reason to abort. On the one hand, we celebrate those who have risen out of difficult circumstances. On the other hand, we say if people in those circumstances should be aborted. I venture to say that most of us wouldn't be here if we applied this own logic to our own lineage. I know I don't need to go too far up our family tree to see suffering, to see poverty, the very things that our culture advocates abortion for. I don't think anybody in the world actually would be here if that's the logic. Life has suffering and hardship, and that is something we need to accept. In many countries, if prenatal screening indicates that there is even a chance of something wrong with the baby, mothers are encouraged to abort. Clubfoot, abort. Cleft palate, abort. Down syndrome, abort. To think that if a baby doesn't meet some arbitrary standard of good enough, it should be aborted is a tragedy. It was interesting, when I spoke in Vancouver, this was last year, after I spoke, we had a Q&A after, and then we ran out of time, but there had been a gentleman who'd been waving in the back. He'd wanted to ask a question. We hadn't gotten to him. Then he came to our booth after, and he would been probably in his 20s. And he came up to me, and he just said, he talked really slow, had a bit of a stutter. Is there abortion for autism? He's clearly had autism. And I said, no, you know, you can't detect autism in the womb at this point. And he just said, and he eventually got out, like, he said, my life matters too. And so you think about the people who've grown up in foster care, people who have a disability, people of autism, like, they're hearing these messages out there that if, you know, they should have been aborted, right? How does that impact people who are born that have these things that we're advocating to abort for? And I just think it's really tragic. The appropriate response to suffering is to eliminate the suffering, not the sufferer. Medical advancements allow us to treat a significant number of congenital defects and other medical issues while babies are still in the womb, let alone after they are born. There are social programs to help with poverty. There are countless families willing to foster and adopt. Abortion disguised as mercy is discrimination against the most helpless and vulnerable, the very ones we should be protecting. I'm going to tell one more story here. There's a diagnosis called anencephaly. That's when a baby's brain is not developed and their skull is kind of crushed in when they're born. 100% the baby's not going to survive for very long. So I get the question, and I've had conversations with people, well, if the baby's going to die anyways, a woman should just be allowed to abort. That's not the correct response. Palliative care is the correct response for a baby with a terminal diagnosis. And we have seen firsthand this play out both with an abortion and with palliative care. So we had a woman come to our Angel Baby support group just over a year ago. She was frantic, she was beside herself, she was pacing, she was kind of pulling at her hair, and she had had an abortion 10 days before at 20 weeks. So our group meets on a Tuesday. She had had an abortion 10 days ago Thursday. 2 days before that Thursday, on a Tuesday, she'd been to the doctor, and the baby, she was 20 weeks along, and the baby had been diagnosed with anencephaly. Before she even left the appointment and could process what had happened, she'd been scheduled for an abortion for 2 days later, because let's just get this taken care of right away. So she was basically frantic when she came to our group meeting. Well, first of all, that her baby that she'd wanted wasn't going to survive because of the diagnosis, but then second of all, that she went through this abortion so quickly. Horribly tragic and difficult situation. Another woman we've walked with, her baby was diagnosed with anencephaly. She chose to carry the baby to term, even though she was under tremendous pressure to abort. She had the baby. Their son lived for about 6 days. They could hold him, they could cuddle him, take pictures with him. And when he passed, their church had a funeral for him. Like, probably, I was there was probably around 300 people at this funeral for this baby. And she just talks about how healing and beautiful that whole experience was. So we've seen firsthand that abortion actually is terrible in a situation like that for a woman's mental health and well-being. Even though it's, you know, promoted as this quick, easy way and out, basically. And finally, when it comes to this, I just want to talk about hard cases. A lot of people are under the impression most abortions are for things like rape, incest, teen pregnancy. The reality, these are what we call red herrings. It's very hard to get stats in Canada. Canada collects as few stats as possible on abortion. In some ways, we're similar to the States. And even in the States, every state collects information differently. But if you look at, this is from the state of Florida. And so every woman who has an abortion there has to say, give a reason why they're having an abortion, and they document this. If you look at this, less than 0.01% of abortions are for incest, it says 0.14% are for rape, less than 1% for a woman's life being in danger, less than 1% for fetal abnormality, 1.5% basically for a woman's physical health being threatened, 1.6% for a woman's mental health being threatened. If you add all those up, they total less than 5%. So less than 5% of all abortions are for these hard cases. And these hard cases are super difficult and tragic, but they should not be the basis for a broad abortion law. So that means 95% of abortions are not for those cases that are always used as the rationale for an abortion, right? I know my daughter, this is the summer after Roe v. Wade was overturned. She was 16 at the time. Her and her friends were having a fire in the summer, and these teenagers were talking about how, that's ridiculous that this was overturned. Women and girls should be allowed to have abortion because of rape, and they're saying all these cases. And my daughter, because she's my daughter and knows what I do and is equipped, she just said, well, actually, abortion for rape is less than 1% of all abortions. So even if you support abortion for the hard cases, what about the other 95%? And they just were flabbergasted because they hadn't known these stats, right? People are under the impression it's for all these difficult situations. I'm not saying the other ones aren't difficult situations, but they wouldn't be like the hard cases. So what about women? While the political debate about abortion rages on, the reality of a woman with an unwanted pregnancy is fear, confusion, and heartache. Most women feel a sense of attachment and protectiveness over the baby they are carrying, which comes as a surprise because they have been told that abortion is no big deal. TikTok, actually, if you go on TikTok, there are a lot of stories on there from women who've had an abortion. I'll just wait for Annabelle to get. Oh, this is interesting. I'll point this one out. If you look at, this is a stat that people are shocked by. Abortion by age, and this is Canadian information by the Canadian Institute for Health. We're under the perspective that teenage girls are having all these abortions. 17 and under only have 2.3% of abortions. 18 to 24, 24.7%. It is actually pretty consistent through all age groups, but it's not the teenagers as we perceive. It's not the teenagers who are doing this as much, right? So that is just, again, this kind of information is like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that. And so we get a lot of comments on this slide about that. But in terms of what about the women, there's just so much heartache for women, not for all women. I'm not going to say it's for all women, but for a lot of women who've had an abortion. So if you go on TikTok, there's so many videos of girls who talk about abortion regret or abortion pain. Is that a video you can show, do you think, back there? Right, does this one play? Okay, so this is just one. She says, things I learned were hard after thinking an abortion would be easy. Despite family's support, this was the most isolated and lonely I'd felt. Fear of how this will haunt me when I become a mom. How painful the procedure was and always having flashbacks. Being torn between my head and my heart, the pressure I put on myself for my career now. Constantly wondering who you would have been. The daily what ifs. Okay, so that is one video of countless videos in there. And what is really interesting, when I downloaded this video, this would have been last spring, at that time, there was already 4,500 comments under that video. And some of the comments are 5 years since mine, and I still grieve something that I 100% know I didn't want at the time. I had an abortion and didn't tell anyone for a year. If you ever need someone, I'm here. I wish there's somebody I could have talked to. The physical pain was the worst I've ever felt to date. I constantly do the, oh, today they would have been this many months old. It's been 10 months since mine. I feel the same. So women are starting to talk about this, but this assumption that it's no big deal, that's not the case. It is a big deal for a lot of people. And again, I'm just blown away. These young girls, they're going to be the ones. These young women, you know, the younger generation, they're going to be the ones who start turning the tide on this because they're actually willing to speak out about the damage and the hurt they have because of it. One woman told me she needs abortion to be okay because she wouldn't be able to live with herself otherwise. An unexpected pregnancy is scary to begin with. Add to that the reality that plans will be appended, financial implications, impact on relationships, potentially single parenting, and the thought of having an unexpected baby is overwhelming and seems very complicated. Even when women would like to keep the baby they carry, many are coerced and pressured into abortion by their boyfriend or family. And if they don't abort, they are on their own. Interestingly, I'm increasingly hearing from siblings of babies that were aborted. I'll get phone calls and emails from people saying, my mom had an abortion, I'm missing siblings. I'm the only child, and she aborted my older sibling or younger sibling. And there's a lot of grief that even comes with the family. So we say it's personal autonomy, but it is impacting others. What's interesting, I'm going to move to the Canadian women wish they could have more children slide. So what's interesting is there's a study that came out just in 2023. What's ironic is women in Canada say they wish they had more children than they actually had. So what we're doing in our culture is we're kind of making children the enemies of a woman's career, her freedom. We prioritize those things. And what's happening now is that actually women are regretting they didn't have more children. Overall, in total, 60% of women ages 18 to 44 wish they had more children, right? And so we really, as a culture, need to be honest with ourselves that, you know what, it's okay to have kids. It's okay for a woman to want to have kids, to have family. And I know myself, I'm almost 50, and it's so interesting. You view life different now than you do when you're in your 20s, obviously. And I even say to my daughter, because she's looking at universities and colleges for fall, trying to figure out what she wants to do, and I just encourage her, and I do this with my boys as well, but it's a little bit different for women. Say, like, live with the end in mind. Live with what you want your life to be like when you're 50. I said, do you want to have a family? Do you want to have children? What do you want your life to look like then? Because you know what, careers are disappointing and they ultimately don't fill. But a family and those relationships, that's what ultimately matters in the end. And we're not really allowed to say this because then we're against women or, you know, we want to control women's bodies. But that's not what this is about. We've been trying to control women's bodies. You know, the fear of that is leading to women who have emptiness in their hearts. So that's something, as a culture, we really need to consider. So as you can see, well, I was just going to say, if the inherent value of life is not enough to convince people that abortion is wrong, the impact it's having on women should. So as you can see, abortion ends the life of a baby, and it is harmful to women. It should not be controversial to support life. It should be a given. Okay, so now what I want to do is switch to the other end of life. So our organization started, it focused on abortion and pro-life from that side, but since 2016, medical assistance in dying was implemented. So now we've added that to our mission as well to speak about that as well. I know there's a lot of information. Hang in there. All right, so medical assistance in dying is the Canadian legislation, we call it MAID, that allows physicians, nurse practitioners, and pharmacists to carry out euthanasia and assisted suicide. Assisted suicide is a provision or prescription of a drug that the eligible person takes themselves in order to bring about their own death. Euthanasia is the direct administration of a substance that causes death, such as the injection of a drug. This substance is administered by a physician or nurse practitioner. When the Criminal Code was introduced in Canada in 1892, suicide and assisted suicide were considered criminal offenses. While suicide was decriminalized in 1972, assisted suicide, euthanasia, is primarily what they meant, remained illegal. In June of 2016, assisted suicide was legalized in Canada as an exception to the Criminal Code. The federal government passed the Medical Assistance in Dying Act, which established the eligibility criteria and procedural safeguards for medically assisted suicide. So in 2016, you needed to have a terminal illness, you needed to be suffering, you needed to be near death. So that was in 2016. In 2021, this is where things really go off the rails, legislation was passed called Bill C-7 that expanded eligibility for MAID. And the basis of this, the argument was that it was discrimination to only allow people who are terminally ill and going to die soon to be eligible for MAID, but that other people should be allowed. People who are terminally ill but not near death should be able to access it, people with disabilities should be able to access it, and people with mental illness should be able to access this. So that was the change in 2021. In a few short years, Canada has become the most permissive country in the world when it comes to abortion and MAID, and that is not hyperbole. Virtually all deaths are by euthanasia. There's a stat that we collected. This is from when MAID was legalized in 2016 to the end of October 2022. This is just Ontario. In that time frame, 13,011 people in Ontario chose to die by MAID. Only 3 self-administered. So we talk about in terms of MAID, assisted suicide, or euthanasia. It encompasses both, but really, virtually 100% are choosing euthanasia. So you can tell there's there's some sort of psychology to it. People do not want to self-administer. But if a physician or somebody else does it to them, it somehow sanitizes it, and it seems like a treatment versus suicide. In addition, when it comes to 2021 legislation, the other thing it changed, in the 2016 legislation, you had to have 2 witnesses sign off on your choice to go die by MAID. In 2021, they changed it to 1 witness, and that witness can be somebody in the hospital. It can be a medical professional. So now many hospitals have MAID teams that go around from room to room, or from room to room, I shouldn't say from room to room, but if they see somebody with a diagnosis that they think should consider MAID, somebody will go visit them in their room, unasked for, and say, have you considered MAID? Are you considering MAID? Maybe you should consider it. And 2 weeks ago, I got an email from an acquaintance of mine saying her aunt has congenital heart failure, and she had been admitted to Health Sciences Center. Is in the process of doing tests. They haven't even got the results back from the tests, and somebody from the MAID team had come and asked her if she'd considered MAID. And we hear these stories constantly from across the country. It depends by region to region and hospital to hospital. So there may be some hospitals that aren't doing this or some regions that aren't. But there are a lot that are based on the feedback we are getting. On February 2020, so this legislation, Bill C-7, there was a lot of opposition to this. For example, the Canadian Mental Health Association released a statement indicating that it is deeply disappointed that the government supports allowing those with mental illnesses to seek medical assistance in dying. A policy statement from the Canadian Centre for Addiction and Mental Health recommended against allowing MAID for mental illness. So these groups were presenting to a committee that was, deciding if MAID should be expanded. In addition, more than 300 disability advocacy groups in Canada voiced opposition to Bill C-7 amendments pushed through the legislative process by the Liberal government. Even the United Nations Human Rights Council's Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities voiced concerns about Bill C-7. They wrote a report, the United Nations wrote a report and sent it to the government and said, from a disability rights perspective, there is a grave concern that if assisted dying is made available for all persons with health condition or impairment, regardless of whether they are close to death, a social assumption might follow or be subtly reinforced that it is better to be dead than to live with a disability. It is not beyond possibility that if offered an expanded right as per Bill C7, persons with disabilities may decide to end their lives because of broader social factors, including loneliness, social isolation, and lack of access to quality support services. And that is what we're seeing happen. Professional groups such as the World Medical Association, the British Medical Association, the American Medical Association, and the American Psychiatric Association have all expressed unwavering opposition to MAID. The government ignored that, proceeded anyways. But Canadians don't seem to mind. Remember how I was talked about before, how we're living in it, so we don't realize what an outlier we are in the world? In May of this year, or I guess it was this last year, an independent research co-study was done of Canadians. So the first number is all Canadians like 18 and older. The one in brackets is age 18 to 34. 27 support MAID for poverty, 28% for homelessness, 51% for inability to receive medical treatment, 42% for mental illness, 50% for disability. Our culture increasingly believes that it is better for people to die rather than to face any kind of suffering or potential suffering. People with disabilities, mental illness, or disease diagnosis are increasingly being told that MAID is a legitimate treatment option even when their own death is not foreseeable. Good news is, based on what's happening in Canada, other countries around the world are saying no to MAID. And that is not a joke. There's literally countries that this is coming forward to push assisted suicide legislation through, and because of the train wreck that Canada's been with this, they are actually saying no. So that is a small blessing. In addition, yesterday, MAID for mental illness, that was supposed to be legalized now coming on March 17th. Yesterday, the federal government announced that it is pausing it for the second time. So that is, that is a small positive. We'll take the small victories where we can. So reports are that it might be a pause till after the next election. So hopefully if a new government is elected, this will just be scrapped altogether. But, we'll pray and be cautiously optimistic. MAID is government-approved discrimination against the vulnerable and marginalized. Interesting how we promote diversity, equity, inclusion so much in our culture. But when it comes to in the womb or at the end of life, the same people we advocate these things for, we consider disposable. In a few short years, Canada has become the most permissive country in the world when it comes to MAID. I said it before, I want to say it again. Between 2016 and 2022, 45,000 Canadians chose medical assistance in dying. And this isn't including 2023, those numbers aren't out yet. You could probably add 15,000 to that. It's probably around 60 at this point. What's interesting is, according to Stats Canada, 4,500 people die by suicide each year. But the government has assured us that people with suicidal ideation will not qualify for assisted suicide. It's kind of bizarre. I don't know how they can rationalize that. Some provinces are coding MAID as palliative care. So then they're saying they're increasing investment in palliative care. So people are under the perspective they're investing in what palliative care should actually be, helping people live well during their illness and passing. But now they're, they figured out, I think they're kind of sneaky. I don't know. So they're saying we're increasing investment in palliative care when we're really increasing investment in MAID. And again, Canada is the only jurisdiction in the world where MAID is presented as a treatment option. Other jurisdictions where euthanasia is legalized, the patient has to initiate the conversation. In Canada, the medical professionals can initiate the conversation. Consider this headline. This is from last summer. Quebecers no longer see doctor-assisted suicide deaths as a last resort. A MAID oversight body in Quebec said we're no longer dealing with an exceptional treatment, but a treatment that is very frequent. MAID now accounts for 7% of deaths in Quebec and leads the world in MAID deaths. Canada overall, 4% of deaths are by MAID. This weekend there was a headline in the paper. It says, surge in medically assisted deaths under Canada's MAID program outpaces every other country. And this was in the Toronto Star, and the Globe and Mail also had an article on that. And these tend to be more progressive publications. And even they're kind of gently saying, like, okay, or, expressing these facts like this. It's just really out of control. Further, in some regions in Canada, MAID is being actively promoted. If you live in the Fraser Health region in BC, when you turn 65, you receive information promoting MAID. So last summer, pensioners who turn 65 go to presentations, they receive information. Healthy people, they're just retiring. And in their information packages were the following 3 slides. Information, expressions wanting to die, but I'll draw your attention to the pink box where it says, a previous history of suicide does not automatically prohibit someone from being eligible for MAID. You can do the next one, Annabelle. And it explains the MAID track system. You can pick 1 or 2. 1, your death is reasonably foreseeable. 2, death is not reasonably foreseeable. But don't let that stop you from trying to end your life or have a doctor end your life. And then the next one, a nice little chart, just laying it out for you. Can you imagine retiring and that's the information you get from your healthcare region? Shouldn't you be promoting how to live, your last years, or make them, that you've retired, how to make them the best you can be? It's kind of outrageous. Meth removes the ethical and moral responsibility society has to take care of the aging and vulnerable under the pretext of compassion and personal liberty. Honestly, this is a cost-saving measure. It's an aging population. The federal government wants to save money on health care. So you can say it's compassion. You can say it's personal autonomy, but it's money. It's money. Further, as the rate and rationale for MAID expand, at what point will the right to die turn into the obligation to die? Will we have to opt out? Will we need to have to sign something that we actually opt out? Will someone be encouraged to die by MAID to free up a hospital bed or to donate their organs to someone whose life is deemed, more viable for a longer time? Canada is the least restrictive country in the world when it comes to assisted dying and euthanasia. To put into perspective how out of control MAID is in Canada, consider this. The state of California legalized their assisted suicide program the same year Canada did in 2016. We basically have the same populations, 38, 39 million, okay? And California is considered a really progressive state in terms of the states. In 2021, 486 people died by MAID in California, 10,064 in Canada. It's just out of control. That just should give some perspective, right? California has tighter parameters, terminally ill, really close to death, and suffering, more like the original 2016 legislation was in Canada. Ironically, the reason most Canadians choose MAID is not because of physical pain. That's a lot of the assumption that there's this physical pain, people are in physical pain and they're suffering. It's because of things like loss of ability to engage in meaningful activities, and this is a government report. Loss of ability to perform activities of daily living, inadequate control of pain or concern. So that shouldn't even be the same category. It should be inadequate control of pain or scared of having inadequate control of pain. So you can't even really trust that number. Loss of dignity, etc. As it turns out, it's losing the things that give life meaning that cause people to despair. Suffering mentally, emotionally, and spiritually are often more difficult for people to deal with than physical pain. So what I'm going to do now is there's a lot of similarities in terms of the why this is happening both at the beginning of life and at the end of life. So I'm going to wrap it up and just talk about 3 points why this is happening. How did we get to this point in our culture? It doesn't mean that these apply to every person or every situation, but just from my observations, this is kind of how I see we've gotten here. And first of all, I want to talk about the rise of the material worldview. So we're in a postmodern culture. I'm sure we've all heard that term before. where as people have moved away from Christianity and religion, they're moving to a material worldview, it's called. And this worldview says that the physical world, including matter and energy, is a fundamental reality, and that all phenomena, including consciousness and mental states, can be explained in terms of physical processes. Ultimately, life is of no eternal significance, so hardships and suffering are meaningless. The goal in a culture like ours is to maximize pleasure. This is all there is. So if we're not having a good time, and when we die, we just turn back to dust and have no eternal significance, no soul, life really has very little value in that perspective. So if you end the life of a baby, or if you choose to die in the end, it's neither here nor there. We're all just, material. The material worldview and its view on suffering is really contrary to the message of the gospel. The gospel message gives us comfort in our suffering. It tells us our suffering has meaning, and it gives us hope and an eternal glory. And I think overall, the church, Christians, we really need to have a better theology on suffering. The Bible is a book talks a lot about suffering, and yet so few of us know how to suffer well. I presented on Sunday night, and one of the questions at the end, or one of the comments at the end, was a woman stood up, and she said, she can't count how many times she's heard people say things like, well, if I'm going to end up in a home, Christians she was talking about, if I'm going to end up in a home, just want to end it before that, or end it before somebody has to change my diaper, or whatever it is. So these are Christians talking about suffering in that way. And I just think we need to have a different perspective. Perspective I think about often is, we come into the world dependent on others to take care of us, and we leave the world the same way, dependent on others to take care of us. And instead of always fighting that we need to just be super independent right till the end, the fact is we are all going to die, and it is totally natural to need help at the end. Of course, none of us want to suffer, but we do need to learn to suffer well, and both for ourselves, and I think that's what we're supposed to do, but it's also an incredible testimony to those around us if we would learn to suffer and die well. The second thing I wanted to talk about was individualism. So we see this in our culture. This has been going on for decades. Individualism is a broad social and philosophical perspective that emphasizes the importance of the individual's rights, independence, and uniqueness. It advocates for valuing personal freedom, self-reliance, and the protection of individual rights. Like a lot of good things, it started off with good intentions. Listen to what the outcomes were supposed to be. Increased self-confidence and a sense of personal agency, and less loneliness because self-reliance helps people be comfortable with their own company and have strong internal sense of identity. Ironically, the outcomes are basically what it was trying to prevent. The outcomes have been isolation, detachment and lack of meaningful connections, lack of community, weaker social bonds and connection to community, and unmet expectations and fulfillment. A sense of emptiness as personal success doesn't translate into meaningful relationships. In other words, loneliness. There is an epidemic of loneliness, and this is just a massive factor on both the beginning and end of life. A 2021 Stats Can survey shows that over 40% of Canadians feel lonely some or all the time. The U.S. Centre for Disease Control and Prevention says loneliness can lead to dementia, heart disease, stroke, premature death. It's as bad for people as smoking. Loneliness reshapes the brain. It literally shrinks the hippocampus in our brain. Dr. Jacques Lee from Mount Sinai Hospital says, our core fundamental being as a human species is a social one. We are deeply connected to each other because we need each other in order to survive. And so when we disrupt that process of connection, we start to deteriorate. The brain actually registers a sense of, oh, I guess we don't need other people. We don't need to be connected to other people. Man, this is just a huge opportunity for the greater church, to connect with, to provide connection to people. Like, people aren't going to walk around saying, I'm lonely, I'm hurting, I need help. But they are. So many people are. We're created for connection. And when we move from living for ourselves to living for the sake of others, that is when we'll begin to flourish and become less lonely. I really think we've lost sight of caring for the individual. We look at the masses of people and get overwhelmed by the stats. Mother Teresa said something like, if I look at the masses, I will never act. But if I look at the one, I will. Something to that effect. And I think that's true. And I'm really moved by Luke 15. I just really think it's a beautiful passage in Scripture. In it, we have the parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. And I know those stories are framed in terms of redemption. You know, angels celebrate when one soul is redeemed. But I think that's a really powerful witness to us that one person matters. People are desperate to know that someone cares. And one person should be enough for us to care about. And if we all just care about the people in our sphere of influences, we will already make a huge difference. Again, I mentioned Sarah, being connected with Sarah. She helped connect a pregnant teen to an incredible family. That girl's life really, compared to what it was a year ago, that girl's life has dramatically changed. And that matters. That matters for that girl, for her boyfriend, for their baby. Just care about the one. About a year and a half ago, I got an email from a 38-year-old woman. She's visually impaired, and she said she's paneling for MAID. She's super lonely, downtown Winnipeg. She didn't feel safe where she was living, and she was paneling for MAID. So I got back to her, obviously, and having conversations with her. She just really wanted to move, but she didn't have the finances to move. Our organization literally gave her $1,000 to move, paid for her to move to a different area of the city. She's by a transit stop. She's by a grocery store. We encouraged her to get involved in different things. And she stopped wanting to die by MAID. She felt her life had purpose again. It's just these are small things we can do that can actually change the course. And in the stage we're at in our country, save lives. I want to talk about personal autonomy next. I've talked about that quite a bit already, but this is huge. So personal autonomy refers to an individual's capacity to make their own decisions. And as we've talked about, the thing about personal autonomy is it's precluding us from caring about others because we've just been conditioned to say to people, you do you, live your truth, I won't judge, I'll support you whatever you decide. So now somebody who's even crying out for help is not getting somebody saying to them, you know, don't have that abortion. We'll walk alongside you. Don't choose MAID. We want you to stay. We respond like, you do you. And we're scared to even care about people because we're told, let people do what they want. So that's a huge problem that I see in our culture when it comes to personal autonomy. In addition, as I've said, our personal autonomy does impact other people. Oh man, I just heard the most heartbreaking story yesterday about MAID. A woman, her husband chose to die by MAID 3.5 years ago. He'd been given 6 to 9 months to live, and he'd been alive for around 2 months of that, and he told his wife he's dying by MAID tomorrow. So he just sprung it on her. Yep, he's dying by MAID tomorrow. Not to mention, they had business interests. They had all sorts of stuff that needed to be taken care of. And he died and left her with it all. Now you're telling me, like, this is an issue of his personal autonomy? The collateral damage because of his decision to exercise his right is just massive on her, on their family, on the other people, you know, who maybe they, I don't know, owe money to or need to sell their business to, whatever it is. So this personal autonomy, obviously we want people to be able to give consent and have control over their bodies, but it's not without limits. So we're in this perfect storm. The material worldview tells people their lives are of no eternal significance and that hardship and suffering is meaningless. Individualism is causing an epidemic of loneliness, and personal autonomy tells people they have the right to die on their own terms. If personal autonomy is the highest value in our culture, and it really seems to be, then abortion and MAID are something to celebrate. The complex moral issues are irrelevant. You do you. So what's a better way forward? In closing, I think I've probably I've talked a long time now. I'm just going to close it up now so we can have some questions. I just want to read a response to you that I think is just the most beautiful response from a church. This is in the MB Church's Confession of Faith, and I wish I'd written it. It's just this beautiful encapsulation of what our approach should be to life issues. And it says, we believe that all human life belongs to God. Each person is created in the image of God and ought to be celebrated and nurtured. Because God is creator, the author and giver of life, we oppose all actions and attitudes which devalue human life. The unborn, disabled, poor, aging, and dying are all particularly vulnerable to such injustices. Christ calls the people of all nations to care for the defenseless. God values human life highly. Ultimate decisions regarding life and death belong to God. Therefore, we hold that procedures designed to take life, including abortion, euthanasia, and assisted suicide, are an affront to God's sovereignty. We esteem the life-sustaining findings of medical science, but recognize that there are limits to the value of seeking to sustain life indefinitely. In all complex ethical decisions regarding life and death, we seek to offer hope and healing, support and counsel in the context of Christian community. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for having me. And do you want me to stay up here for the Q&A, I guess? Okay.
I'm just going to say one thing is watch a message today, and they're thinking about you do you, and it's really tune your heart into truth, because your heart is a liar. And because if you rely on your own heart, your own decisions, it lies to you. And so I was listening to this message this afternoon, and it was amazing to hear that it's like you have to tune your heart into truth, like an instrument. If it's untuned, it does not make sense to go forth. But when it's tuned, you tune it to the level of Christ's value. And that truth is where you have to live by, not by your own truth. So living you is a false statement. The only way you can live you is when you live Christ. And it's that way. So anyway, we're going to open up to questions. You can take the screen share off, and so we can see the people online too. And let's stick to short comments and questions. Definitely can do comments if you have an experience that you want to share or whatever. But we want to walk in that either on Zoom. We see our people here joining us today from all over the place. But it's good to have you all here. And so we're going to open it to questions. I had one, but I forgot. So maybe somebody else will grab it. No, it's not. Yeah, we're going to say goodbye to live. Thank you for joining us, Facebook Live. You don't get to join us. That's why we have Zoom. So you come on down on Zoom. The only reason why we don't do it live is because there's a pause in so much of that. And if you pause too long on Facebook,